Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath. Bow wow. Coming back at you with another episode of Archon's Armies. Today we'll be talking about Genestealer cults, and I'll try and keep this comprehensive for you. So let's jump right into it. First off, mythos. Now, a couple of the images here are going to be a little bit grainy, but you'll be able to find them at times. So, let's start off with Genestealers are not Tyranids, old lore and origins. So, Genestealers, as many of the old lore heads know, existed long before Tyranids did. And at the time, the Imperium, for example, had been dealing with Genestealers for a great deal of time before the Tyranids ever really revealed themselves. It was not even known that the Genestealers were precursors to the Tyranids. They were considered a totally different alien species, and because of their connection to their psychic powers, some even considered them a chaotic species. Some sort of chaos acclimatized Xeno, which exists within many different areas of real space. However, we know now that Genestealers are indeed a sub-breed of Tyranid, and are in fact their precursors or infiltration-specialized foot troops. Functions like a chaos cult. Now, there's a lot of crossovers, very interesting ones, between how a Genestealer cult operates, in the dregs of Imperial society, organizing themselves clandestinely before they break out into open rebellion, organizing things with not necessarily rituals, but at least with massive psychic signaling and various other types of psychic affectation, including localized hive minding and some versions of the Shadow and the Warp. They cannot project the Shadow and the Warp, but a lot of their psychic powers have abilities similar to the Tyranid psychic disciplines. The Shadow and the Warp being one of them, confusion or disorientation, hallucination, and deceptive magic being another one. So their psychers are capable of a lot of things that are similar to chaos magic, but it is decidedly more Tyranid in origin. Unable to take worlds on their own. Now, I actually think that this is super interesting when a Genestealer cult manages to succeed, but there's no Tyranids around to come and capture them or come and get them, essentially. Because Genestealer infestations have begun and come to completion within the Imperium long before the Tyranids showed up, we know that there are worlds that the Genestealers have completely infested, taken over in its entirety, and then simply left or remained for a certain amount of time. So, my solution to this generally is no Tyranids, take to the stars. This is one of the reasons why Genestealers, you'll find them on things like Space Hulks, you'll find them in random ships that have been abandoned or have run out of fuel. Essentially, a Genestealer cult, once it has taken a world on its own, which they do manage to do on occasion, they're not always successful, but they are pretty capable of taking a planet by themselves without Tyranid assistance. The Tyranids do prefer to have Genestealers essentially soften up resistance for them, but we will not be talking about that unless we do a Genestealers army video. But in general, how it will work with the Genestealers is either they will take a planet on their own and then they will give it up willingly to the Tyranids, or by give it up, I mean they will get reabsorbed by the hive mind and eaten and then redeployed somewhere else, or not. Or they will take a planet in its entirety like a chaos cult by themselves, absorb all of the population, and then take to the stars via any means available to them. The Patriarch and his most promising subjects will jump into whatever void-capable ships they manage to capture or grab, and then they will go out in search of another planet. In such a way, the infestation of Genestealers can continue, even after the initial planet has been taken. Lone foot soldiers, do they use other Tyranids? So, the biggest one that we're going to talk about here is Lictors, and some of the kind of Tyranid half-breeds that come in the first generation. Obviously, the Patriarch is more of a Tyranid than he is a Genestealer, by the rules of, he's originally from the Hive Fleet, he's generated by the Hive Mind, he is the progenitor of the Genestealer Hive Mind. However, like the Pure Strain and like the Lictors, I consider them an in-between between Tyranids and Genestealers. Obviously, every Genestealer is a Tyranid, but not all Tyranids are Genestealers. The only crossover to that, I would argue, are the first-generation Pure Strain, who are come along with the Patriarch, and they are his first acolytes. The Patriarch himself and lictors, who are very often used by Genestealer cults, but they are decidedly Tyranids. Moving on, the reality of Genestealer armies, and we will be talking about armies in this for large portions of it, the generations and cycles of the armies. So, the first infiltration, the first creatures upon the planet, are the Pure Strain. The Pure Strain, they're up here. They look much more Tyranid-like. They're almost like a cross between a very messed up human or a late-stage hybrid Genestealer and a Gaunt or a Termagant. Now, they have claws, they have 4 arms, they have a carapace of armor protection, a large domed lobed head, purple skin, an ovipositor in their throat that looks like a tongue, and a very alien face. So they are decidedly inhuman, and along with them comes the other Pure Strain, which is their psychic locus, which is the Patriarch. Now, there's a picture of the Patriarch down here, but we'll be going into them a little bit deeper later. The Patriarch, essentially, he also has an ovipositor, but the main thing that his job is to extend the psychic power of the cult and to control the Pure Strain and begin the infestation. So, the Pure Strain comes onto a planet, however it may happen. Generally, they'll infiltrate a ship that the Tyranids have, otherwise engaged. They'll have attacked a ship and left a Patriarch and a couple of Pure Strain with him. The Patriarch will go through and consume a whole bunch of the crew, either psychically dominating them or having the Pure Strain infect them with the Tyranid, or infect them with the ovipositor, and give them like that sudden injection of Tyranid DNA. The next strain, once they reach a planet and they start expanding out, they escape the starport, they find some spot where they can set up, and the Patriarch makes his home there. The others will come with him. In general, they're incredibly clandestine. They move in very small groups. They tend to move at night and kill anything that sees them. And because they are very fast, very deadly, and they have psychic powers with the Patriarch, it's pretty hard to catch them at this point. Searching a ship, you'd think that would be pretty easy to find them. It's pretty easy until the Patriarch, mind controls a whole bunch of your security guards, and they just walk past him as if they didn't see him. Or they walk into a room, and a bunch of Pure Strains instantly kill them, and then they get some second generation to replace them. But apart from that, we get into the next cycle, which is Acolytes. Now, Acolytes are 3-armed monstrosities that we'll talk about when we get into the different types of units. They are my favorites to a degree. They are pretty cool. The hybrids and the Acolytes are kind of similar. They both have 3 arms. They both have more of those Tyranid the Acolytes have more of those Tyranid 3-arm builds. They have a very inhuman look to them, and they can't really pass as human quite easily. The first generation that can pass as human are hybrids. Hybrids are what come after that. So obviously the Acolytes are the firstborn. They're the ones that get oviposited, and they become more human as the human that they consumed essentially births an Acolyte. Whether it literally consumes them and changes their DNA, or it bursts out of them like a chest hugger. Kind of depends on what lore you're reading. But either way, they oviposit the creature. The creature produces an Acolyte if it was a Pure Strain at first. Then the Acolytes oviposit other creatures. The result is a hybrid. Now, the hybrids are still inhuman upon a detailed examination. They still have a ridge on their head. Their skin is abnormally pale and slightly bluish or purplish. They also have some pretty obvious, distentations and differences in their genetic makeup and their internal organs that mark them out as non-human. But a lot of the things that Genestealers do to remain stealthy while also increasing their numbers is have hybrids go out with, heavy coverings. It's not abnormal on a lot of planets for somebody to wear, a large top hat and some heavy clothing like a trench coat. Or they could be wearing mining outfits that require them to be in pressure suits. No one's really going to question you as long as they can see your eyes and see that you have skin and stuff. So the hybrids can get around with a little bit more complicated of a disguise. So they're the first ones that can kind of go out into society and start recruiting, quote-unquote, or otherwise coercing people into the cult via oviposition. The last phase is neophytes. Now, neophytes are slightly more or less human. They essentially look like hybrids, but they are really special. So they are hybrids that have a bunch of different things. So these are your locusts. These are your like different types of spell weavers or psychers. Some of the acolytes have specialists too, like they have kellermorphs. But the neophytes are the first generation where you get like more psychic capable creatures. And then the last cycle after that is the pure strain again, with also extending into other options that are made specially, like aberrations. So, really quick overview. Essentially, it goes from pure strain, which are the first generation. They're directly from the hive of Tyranids. They are very Tyranid-like. Then you get the acolytes, which have 3 arms. They're clearly still inhuman, but they are a little bit more capable of not being noticeable at a glance. They can hide a little better, and they are a little bit smarter than necessarily a straight-up pure strain. Then hybrids, which can hide in human society, they are still inhuman, and they can be seen as inhuman upon close inspection of like a body, but in general, they can hide within Imperial society. Then you get neophytes, which are the special and a lot of psychic-powered ones. And then finally we go back to pure strain. Now the last group of pure strain will be essentially different from the original pure strain. They won't be hive tyrannid-like. They will essentially be like a human body distended to look like a pure strain tyrannid. And then things like aberrants kind of get made either intentionally or by accident. Essentially something births that wasn't supposed to, or there's some sort of modification created to make aberrants and things like that. The weird, the wild, and the special. So, Tyranids don't have a ton of huge monsters. They have aberrants, and they have the pure strain, and they have the sire, the patriarch. But those are not really monstrous in terms of like Tyranid monsters. So a lot of their stuff is just weird or special or super odd. Like a lot of them birth psychers. They have a lot of psychic magic that they can use. They all have a lot of connection to the hive mind, and they have a localized hive mind, and we'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of their tactics and a lot of their weaponry and stuff, because you have things like we have 3 arms, or we have psychic powers, or we have unnatural abilities that are only things that acolytes might have. Those lead them to have kind of an eclectic, messy army that can kind of come off as a little bit rabble-ish or even like mutant-ish, which is another reason why Genestealers often get mistaken for like chaos forces, because, you know, looking at an acolyte, a hybrid, and a neophyte all fighting together, you might think, oh my goodness, a mutant horde, if you didn't know what Genestealers were. Reliance upon psychic connection. So, the Patriarch is the locus, or the central nexus, of a psychic connection that connects all infected and birthed Genestealer creatures. Hybrids don't necessarily always know that they are infected. Similar thing with some of the neophytes. If they're super stealthy, they don't necessarily know that they're infected, but they can be mind-controlled and essentially tethered to the Patriarch's will really easily. And all of a sudden, this kind of MK Ultra switch goes off, and all of these people who were normal people a second ago, all of a sudden they're picking up weapons and killing their friends, or they're attacking the local law enforcement, and this mass unrest can come out of nowhere. And that's one of the big things, is that the Patriarch relies upon his psychic tether and the other psychic creatures that he creates from the neophytes to make sure that his army is working together, because you can infect a lot of people, but if your psychic powers get blocked or weakened, or there's something blocking you or preventing you from using them, like another psyker fighting you, or Blackstone, or Nulls around, anything like that, it can damage the psychic connection, which can actually cause a lot of the Genestealers to freak out or get confused or sick. It doesn't happen a ton of the time, but it is one of the ways that you can actually counter Genestealers, is by managing to interrupt the Patriarch's focus. It's not as bad as Tyranids. They don't revert to being animalistic monsters unless they're pure strain or aberrants. But they might be confused. They might not be so driven to fight anymore. They might not realize what they've been doing. So they might freak out. But, yeah. The other thing is masses and masters. So, a lot of the neophyte classes, not to mention the Patriarch himself, are in control. They are in direct control. They are tethering huge masses of Genestealers to fulfill their will as best they can. This is not like data tethering where you're commanding every little tiny piece of what they're doing. It's a lot more like psychic suggestion. You are planting an idea in the mind of the infected creature, and much like a parasite, you are convincing them to do something, whether it's fight, whether it's be violent. They're doing this in addition to preaching to their followers. So, and we'll talk about the different cults in a while, but they are the masters of these forces. They are preaching the duplicitous doctrine of the Genestealers' kind of religion or their faith, and they are on top of that psychically indoctrinating them to follow orders and do what they say. So they're not puppets, but they're also not of free will. The types of Genestealers and the function. Let's get into that after this one. Sorry, back to here. We have a Locus, or a kind of Dr. Mindbender Psyker here. We have some very mutated looking Genestealers. We got some Aberrants. We have some definitely hybrids. And then one of the original OG armored first generation Pure Strain. Pros and cons of Genestealer armies. Organization. This is one of the massive pros, and it's actually one of the main advantages that Genestealers have over any other force. They don't require, lines of control or command or communication. They are psychically bonded into this mass, and with that psychic connection being so strong and so centralized, they don't really have to worry about things, taking them unawares or their lines getting confused. They don't necessarily have to worry too much about morale. Their organization is built upon the concept that they are all literally of one mind. The local hive mind is controlling them, meaning that when the hive mind gives an instruction, everyone obeys. There's not really any confusion. People just kind of do what the hive mind says. And this has a little bit of a disadvantage in that if you sever the hive mind, if you attack the Patriarch, or if you kill a lot of the advanced specialist units, you can disrupt it a little bit. But even then, disruption doesn't end their organization. And at the end of the day, a lot of the regular ones, a majority of the cult will be, infected humans. And or those hybrids. Sorry, I had to check back. Or those hybrids, they will still follow instructions after the hive mind is damaged or weakened. And they will follow them from the nearest, highest-ranking Genestealer involved. So, it's good organization. It has flaws, but it is pretty impressive compared with something like a cultist army, where they're going to require a lot more regimenting, discipline, encouragement. You don't necessarily have to encourage Genestealers to fight because of merit. You don't have to, argue with them and convince them, give them speeches and shit. No, they're psychically conditioned to follow instructions. So, unless that psychic indoctrination is removed, or the Patriarch is slain, they're going to pretty much go along with what you tell them. Numbers. This is one of the big advantages. Genestealers can infect whole societies, and effect massive collapse in a very short amount of time, because the infection is relatively hard to trace. And you might say, well, that's ridiculous. Obviously, doing an autopsy on every body, or every couple of hundred bodies, you're going to find a couple of Genestealers. Yeah, you might. But you might also be, the first thing that a Genestealer Patriarch might do is infect everyone in the medical industry, so that every time that a doctor opens up a dead body and it's got a Genestealer in it, the guy who's infected is going to go, huh, that's really strange. And then the Patriarch's going to focus on him, he's going to get mind controlled, and then he's going to go, no, that's not all that strange. That's totally normal. That's how human organs look. I'm going to say that there's nothing wrong with this guy. Cremation, and there you go. Problem solved, essentially. The Genestealers cover up a lot of their infection by infecting people who are going to tattle on them. So, they can get to ludicrous portions of the populations compared with a Chaos Cult. A Chaos Cult has to be constantly reinforcing, constantly preaching, giving advantages and perks to its followers. All the Genestealer has to do is shove its tongue down somebody's throat, and then you have another follower who basically can't say no, is psychically indoctrinated, and is a living sleeper agent until they need to be part of the uprising. Training. This is one big disadvantage with Genestealer cults. While you can get those large numbers, there's no way for Genestealers to train and for it to be subtle, basically ever. I know there's pictures here, obviously the Kellermorph, some of the specialists have training kind of gene-coded into them, or they get very good at something because of their specialty, and then these gentlemen have some body armor, but they might be infected PDF troopers. That's a little bit more rare, but training your entire cult or getting a Genestealer cult up to a certain level of, methodological, systematic military training is definitely a con. While numbers is a plus, organization is a plus, training is definitely a con. Genestealers will probably be never using very complicated weaponry, unless they are acolytes or something of that nature that are a little bit smarter, a little bit more independent, and while they have to stay entirely underground, they basically have nothing to do except for train in good weapons and equipment. So the specialists can train really well, but the vast majority, the masses of the Genestealer infestation, will not be well trained, meaning that they're going to be limited to kind of crappy, low-grade weapons a lot of the time, and when they're not, it'll be people who were already good with those weapons before the Genestealer uprising began. Scratch building of units and equipment, turning people into Genestealers. So, like I mentioned, when the cycles of generations go through, essentially all that it is one Genestealer oviposits, face kisses and then shoves its tentacle tongue into somebody's throat, oviposits some eggs in there or infects them with the Genestealer virus. They either die and birth a new Genestealer, or it overwrites their genetic code, again, based on whatever lore you're reading. But in either way, it creates a Genestealer out of them. This has a lot of advantages. One, you don't have to do the Chaos Cult thing of, recruiting, convincing, making sure that they're safe to bring into the knowledge of Chaos, making sure that they're happy being part of the cult so they don't disaffect, killing people who aren't any of those things. Genestealers can just kind of do that and then forget about it, because once you're infected, the active psychic interference of the Patriarch is going to be constantly affecting you. So you might be like, oh my gosh, I remember that Genestealer cornering me in an alley and giving me a throat kiss, and then I've been feeling uncomfortable ever since. I should go to the police. And then a little voice in the back of your head says, don't go to the police. The police are your enemy. And then you go, yeah, no, the police are my enemy. I shouldn't go to the cops with that fact. Matter of fact, I should go run down into the Underhive and talk to some random dude at a bar. Like, that psychic suggestion helps you get a lot of equipment and stuff in, because somebody who's psychically suggested is going to be like, huh, maybe I should join the PDF and then grab a whole bunch of firearms and leave my post and bring them down to the Underhive. Maybe I should commit crimes and then go grab a bunch of weapons or equipment and bring it down to the Underhive. You can use these sleeper agents as a Patriarch to arm a whole bunch of your cult. Not to mention that because they tend to pick members of society that are kind of lower class, they will get a lot of laborers with access to things like melee weapons, picks, hammers, mauls, knives, any of that type of stuff. And again, they're not super well trained, so they're not going to be able to use those complicated weapons anyway. So you may as well get them that have the equipment and let them use it. So that's kind of a pro and a con. On the con side, you're limited to people that you can actually infect. So getting people into the PDF, getting them into areas where they can get trained, and getting of your specialized units into public life is going to be really hard. But on the other hand, a lot of your infected are going to come with extra equipment and supplies. And you can also use them as sleeper agents to steal and grab more. So, concentrated aberrants and specialists. I apologize, that's mistyped. I was doing this while I was doing something else. I was busy. Concentrated aberrants and specialists. Like Chaos cults, again, there's a lot of parallels you can draw to this. Like Chaos cults, the elites and specialists, Kellermorphs, Psychers, Locuses, Maguses, all of those special units that are either acolytes or, oh goodness, I'm sorry, I don't know much, neophytes. All of those folks are going to be in tight groups, either around the Patriarch, or they will be leading other groups of basically hybrids, infected, or Genestealer pure strains. The other thing is aberrants. Aberrants are dumb, but they are kind of psychically hive-minded as well, so they don't need to be that smart. And they are on par strength-wise with an Ogren. Ogrins are very, very strong. Aberrants are also very, very strong. But the reason that I say their concentration within the Genestealer army is kind of a negative. For the Chaos Forces, this is a pure positive, having all of your forces concentrated and having all of them leading. The reason I say that it's a bit of a negative as well is the Genestealer elites are a lot less durable than the Chaos Elites. The Chaos Elites are going to have a ton of body armor, they're going to be pretty well trained, they're going to have special mutations and things like that. While Genestealers have that, most of them rely on psychic powers. And while psychic powers are great on the offensive, a lot of the Genestealer psychic powers are not all that destructive. Some of them are, but unlike Chaos, you're going to be doing a lot of confusing, a lot of hallucinations, a lot of messing with people's minds and mind-bending people, more than you're going to be spraying out lightning or anything like that, like Chaos might. The other reason is that even their, melee or ranged units, like Aberrants or, Kellermorphs, and believe me, I love Kellermorphs, the three-pistol gunslinger, the duster-wearing hero of the people. I'm a huge fan of that. I love Kellermorphs. I wish they weren't limited to Genestealers, because I think a Kellermorph equivalent for Chaos would be so darn cool. Like a Billy the Kid-style Chaos Worshipper who just has a whole bunch of six-shooters. Look, it's a cool idea to me, but I do love the Kellermorph. But even them, as kind of a more traditional, non-psychic unit, they're vulnerable to standard firearms. They really aren't shown in most cases with having anything heavier than light body armor. When they do, it's usually industrialized. You see, these guys have some mining rigs. But this Kellermorph basically has a cuirass and not even a helmet. So they are much more like infiltrators who then get turned into battlefield loci or commanders. So concentrating all of these kind of squishy units doesn't improve their durability all that much, as they are still just as vulnerable as the people they're protecting, unlike Chaos, where a majority of the time all of the good equipment is going to go to them. It's very hard for Genestealers to get their hands on super good equipment, things like heavy body armor, specialty weapons. Even the best armed Genestealer has, a bunch of hand cannons? That's pretty much worse than a majority of cults will get their hands on in terms of personal firearms. So the concentrated elites are both a pro and a con. On the pro side, you have good elites, and the aberrants and stuff can work well in groups, and they work well as leaders. On the con side, their equipment and protection is way worse than other units, like Chaos can field, or like the Imperium can field in general, commanders, officers, things like that. And the other thing is, a lot of them are built for infiltration and distraction, and also for concealing the cult's awareness, like the Psychers. And the Kellermorph, even he is designed as an Old West assassin. He's not really designed for out in the battlefield combat. He's a hit and run kind of guy. He's a murderer. A lot of them are murder units. They're like assassins or infiltrators. They don't do as well in outright battle as a Chaos Demagogue or a Chaos Cult Psyker might do. Now, variety of units and asset types. This is definitely a plus, but it has a big limitation. The types of revolts and special weapons are entirely based on what world you're on. If you're on a planet that has a lot of mining equipment, cool. Rock grinders, seismic cannons, all that type of Genestealer only stuff that we would see in Chaos Cults if anyone gave a darn about internal logic, but we don't, so Genestealers get all these cool weapons, but Chaos Forces don't. I'm not salty whatsoever. But the Genestealers are able to get cool stuff on planets that have cool stuff. On your average Hive world, you're probably not going to find any big heavy mining vehicles, and you're definitely not going to find, state-of-the-art rifles or armored vehicles. So, Genestealers in tanks, Genestealers in armored personnel carriers, think a lot more Genestealers in luxury sedans, and Genestealers in maybe some small civilian aircraft. So, the variety of types and units, on one side, being able to use everything that a normal human can use is a great thing, especially when you can steal it for free, which is what the Genestealers tend to do a lot. The mob that had initially been mind broken to go and attack the barracks of the local PDF will grab all of the PDF firearms and then run out and start attacking all the PDF troopers and all the enforcers and stuff. On the other hand, if you're on a planet that doesn't have a lot of weaponry, if you're on a feral or feudal world, or even a civilized world, it's going to be like, well, we broke open the armory, It's a bunch of axes and swords. Uh-oh. What are we gonna do now, boss? We're kind of stuck out here. Everyone knows that we're Genestealers, and we have a bunch of medieval Ren Fair weaponry. We're in for a hard time, aren't we, Patriarch? Patriarch nods slowly. Yes, we are, sir. So, yeah, both a pro and a con. Formation and unit types. So, the Patriarch, or the first generation, the Pure Strain forms, we have them down here. These are Pure Strain. They got the forearms, they got the long claws. These might be second round Pure Strain. But they are, including the Patriarch and other Psychers, is the Genestealer of the cult, the largest and most powerful of the Genestealers. He's a big brain bug. He likes to eat things. He's got 4 arms, and he is remarkably psychically powerful. Now, one big thing about the Patriarch is he does pose as a god for the Genestealers. You know, the Genestealer theology, a lot of it is based off of, when it's not based off of, like, purificationism and believing that the God Emperor has 4 arms, and the Tyranids and the Genestealers are the actual embodiment of the gods, the Star Children, all of that good and likely BS. When it's not based on that, it's also based on, uprising, on revolution, on mistreatment, on all the things that chaos cults base their uprisings on. The local governor isn't giving us enough food, we're all out of work, everything is terrible. Well, that's the exact same thing that the chaos cult next door is selling, guys. I feel like we could team up here. I'm kidding. A team up between Genestealers and chaos cultists would be very, very funny. Because it would be like the Spider-Man meme of, you're trying to disable this society. No, you're trying to disable this society. And the Inquisition is pulling its hair out, screaming. So, yeah. Weird things with the Patriarch are very funny. First generation, the Genestealer hybrids, the Acolytes, display prominent alien features. Second generation, the hybrid Acolytes, or the slightly more human. I kind of skip over them, I put them together. Combine the bloodlines of the indigenous population in the first generation. Third generation, these display mostly human features. Those are the ones with the head ridges and the sharp teeth and the tiny little pig eyes. And then the 4th gen, those are the neophytes that can pass as human, and they also produce all of those specialists. And then the cycle reverts, creating the 4th generation, another set of Pure Strain, and then finally we get to the Aberrants, which have weird, super odd gestation issues that essentially birth something that they didn't intend to. Patriarchs and other Psychers, Tyranid helpers, so Lictors and the Shadow. Now, the Genestealers have been known to use an equivalent of the Shadow in the Warp. Whether this is psychically projected by the Patriarch, whether it's a precursor of a Tyranid hive fleet, or whether it is a collective attempt by various Psychers within the within the Genestealer cult, to project an equivalent of the Shadow in the Warp, is not exactly clear. But what we do know is that they will use Lictors to achieve the same effect. How do Lictors achieve the same effect? Think about what the Shadow of the Warp is. Minus all of the stuff that it does to Psychers. Minus the fact that it makes Psychers unable to scream, it makes them freak out. Generally, the Genestealers won't be able to do that. They won't be that powerful. It might affect them if they're really close to, like, the Patriarch. But if a Astropath is, on the top of a hive, he's not gonna freak out about Genestealers. He might have, some dreams, visions, images, and that might tip him off to, oh my goodness, there's probably Genestealers somewhere around here. But in general, it's the Lictors that achieve a similar effect. What the Shadow is without the Tyranids around and without the ability to silence Astropaths, the Shadow makes people uncomfortable. It makes regular, everyday people scared. It makes them frightened. It's the forward thinking, the projection of the Tyranid hive mind, that nom nom, I'm going to eat everything in existence. That mental state is being projected onto reality. And that terrifies people. That scares people, makes them uncomfortable, even if they don't know why. This is my favorite thing. They just feel generally anxious. They feel afraid. It causes people to be on edge. It causes people to freak out. And one of the big things that, accompanies the Genestealer uprising is, like, all of the people, all of these food riots, all of this issue, we're having sudden civil unrest for no reason. Why is that happening? On one hand, it might be the Patriarch, it might be the kind of questionable Shadow that the Genestealers might be able to generate. My personal theory is a lot of this has to do with the Lictors. Now, Lictors are scary. Lictors are horrifying because they essentially act as the Tyranid assassin equivalent. They go into a society, they're very low-key, they can literally camouflage, like they have active camo from Halo, they can become practically invisible. They jump out at you at night, eat you, kill you, run away again. And it's very hard to track them down, and they are weirdly durable for a creature that spindly. But you'll notice something about lictors that don't tend to exist within other Tyranid groups outside of the very important ones like Old One Eye or the Swarmlord, which I'll talk about if I do a Tyranid Armies video at some point. But the lictors, they get names. You get the Red Dread, the Terror, Qux's Lictor, all these named lictors, and you're like, why do they get names? Why are people talking about them? The reason is because the lictors literally destabilize society with their own presence. What does it mean when a predator like that appears on a world and is actively killing or terrifying important people? Now, I do say terrifying because lictors intentionally go after important people and hang out around them, scare them, show up in hallways, appear and disappear, just stare at them while they sleep. All this creepy, creepy stuff, and you're like, why are they doing that? Why are they not just killing them? Because it affects their mental state. Because knowing that a creature that dangerous and indicative of all of the Imperium's fears is watching you sleep. This thing that could kill you in a heartbeat, and there's almost nothing you could do to try and kill it or get rid of it. It's watching you while you sleep, and every time you try and attack it or go after it or hunt it, it kills everyone involved, and then it's back the next night to do it again. That is terrifying, and if the planetary governor or a whole bunch of officers or whatever are scared for their lives, they haven't been able to sleep, they've been watching this indomitable, invincible shadow hunter slaughtering their guards and keeping them up all night, they're not going to operate on the same level. They're going to be scared. They're going to be freaking out. They're going to be like, man, I haven't slept in like 72 hours because that creature's been hanging over my bed. It can destabilize society when the leadership are all, without sleep, exhausted, terrified, have PTSD, essentially, and the lictor's job is to increase that sense of fear, that unrest, that discomfort, and they could do it via a dozen different ways. Going serial killer mode and just murdering a bunch of random civilians and leaving their corpses in the street, obviously killed by whatever evil predator creature has come onto this world. The planetary governor might be like, we don't know why that happened, or even worse, they might be like, that was a lictor. That was a dangerous Tyranid. I'll pay $5,000 to whoever kills that thing. And then a whole bunch of people go after it and get murdered. That's how it goes from, like, local problem or scary annoyance to the upper class to, like, local living legend of fear and horror. Incarnations of living terror. Which is why the lictors are so darn important. And they can act as kind of a miniature version of that shadow. Heroes and weirdos. Moving on, sorry. Aberrants and Heroes of the People. So, Heroes of the People, that includes things like Kellermorphs. Aberrants are a little bit more like battle monsters. They're not very smart. They act as kind of line breakers. They can wield very powerful weaponry, including like seismic weapons, which are, again, for some reason, Genestealers get to use them, but Chaos doesn't. That's not fair. Genestealer players, I want to shake hands so that you can use our cool psychic powers and I get to use your awesome melee weapons. Just kidding. But the Aberrants get to use all those cool weapons. They get to be line breakers and things like that. And then there are the Heroes of the People. Now, this could be completely fake. Like, you have Acolytes, like the first generation or second generation Acolytes, like the Kellermorph, who's like a desperado, saving people and killing the greedy or the murderous or the craven, all that kind of stuff, like a very Billy the Kid-esque image of a hero. And then you have ones that are leaders by dint of psychically dominating the infected. So a Magus, a Locus, or a Primus that get seen by one of the fourth or third generation, they're seen as like a god. It's like, oh my goodness, they see those favored hive mind creatures, those kind of specialist heroes, the same way that Space Marines see their Primarch. It's like, Oh, the Father, he represents the four-armed Emperor. Of course, everything that you say comes directly from his lips. I glorify in your presence, O hero, O great leader of the people, O great preacher. And all he's doing is basically standing on a platform and screeching in Tyrannid. But, they understand it because they're all infected. And then finally, Focusers and Functionaries. So, I've mentioned the Locus a couple times now, and it includes basically every psychic creature. It extends the power and the effectiveness of the Patriarch's psychic powers. So, a Locus, a Magus, a Primus, and the Prime Psyker, all of them represent essentially little nodes in the psychic connective network of the Patriarch. So they extend his ability to control, to see, to command, and they do literally speak with his voice on occasion via psychic powers. Functionaries, these are more like the Acolytes, especially the first generation Acolytes, and some of the Pure Strain. They work with the Patriarch. Since they can't be out in human society, they can't be infecting people, directly in public, obviously. They have to be a little bit more subtle about it, but they're also way more combat capable without actual weapons. The first generation, they all have, specialty weapons like whips and blades and kind of cult weapons like that. The 5th generation and 1st generation, the Genestealers that are pure strain, they all have, claws. They work like normal Termagants or Tyrannids, or just Gaunt Tyrannids. So, the Functionaries, they kind of don't blend in with human society. They form kind of an underground army that comes out when things are safe and infect people and do things like that, and then they help out with the uprising. But the Functionaries includes, Acolytes who literally help out with the Patriarch. Oh my lord, let me get you more meat, let me bring you more of this, let me make sure that this location is secure. They'll act as guards for him, that kind of stuff. Now, continuing forces. Already talked about those pictures, sorry. Over here, we have some Atalan Ridge Runners. Again, cool stuff that Genestealers get that Chaos doesn't, which I definitely think they should. I will stop saying that now because I am sounding butthurt, and I'm definitely not. But these are essentially Jackal units. This is another example of the local world has equipment that the Genestealers get to use. These guys are clearly in some body armor. They have rifles. They have motorbikes. These kind of light mobile units that act as scouts are super useful for the Genestealers. Down here we have a Locus, that kind of focuser for the psychic powers. We have the Psykers, the main Psyker for the Genestealers, and the Magus over here. They're acting again as these kind of leader hero units, but they're also commanding the Pure Strain. Then you can see again kind of that mind control aspect here. You definitely have either a Pure Strain Genestealer or possibly the Patriarch mind controlling a dude here. He's probably a Genestealer judging by his little hand here. And then you have a Primus with a needle pistol, a beautiful blade, and a claw with all of his buddies, including a nice little seismic cannon down here. Another thing, then never mind, I'm not going to say it again. But these are all these are all 3rd generation or 2nd generation. I like the Acolytes. They're some of my favorite units for the Genestealers. I like that whole 3-arm deal. I like when Chaos does it as well. But these guys are also commanders. They extend authority, and they can command even, these units that are all clearly Genestealers. We have some lovely Aberrants over here with their hammers. These guys are super strong. One of the big downsides with a lot of Genestealer creatures, they don't have a ton of body armor. Now, obviously, some of them may steal them, like these 4th generations over here, who have obviously stolen some PDF weaponry, and this gentleman here. But the Aberrants, really, they don't wear a ton of body armor, and most of the Psykers don't wear a ton either. So, one of the big disadvantages is their lack of protection equipment, but they make up for it usually with numbers. Famous groups and logistics. I am not going to go into every single cult in detail, not only because I am not smart enough to understand how all of them work, but I can just tell you that there are different cults and they do different things. We have some nice Lictor pictures over here. So, cults and subcults. Obviously, all of them are part of the individual cult that is formed by the Patriarch. They're kind of centrally controlled by his psychic powers. And it's very much a local thing. So one Patriarch won't be able to extend his powers beyond a planet. So when the Patriarch leaves, his psychic, print is going to remain via, whatever specialists he leaves behind. But the Hive Cult, the Bladed Cog, the Inner Worm, the Pauper Princes, Rusted Claw, Twisted Helix, all of them have different, like, go-to things. This includes two different things. On one side, it includes what forces they prefer. Some of them prefer to spawn more Pure Strain. Some of them prefer to use more, like, generic humans. Some of them prefer to use vehicles or prefer to use infantry or acolytes. Any of these essentially make up, what the cult values, what they glorify. And you can see here the picture of the four-armed emperor. This idea that the four-armed emperor is the center of their religion. In reality, it's the patriarch, but they subvert it to pretend that it's the emperor, and they glorify it that way. But all of them see these different things, whether it's Twisted Helix and they prefer like Aberrance and other modifications, the Pauper Princes and the Rusted Claw. I think the Bladed Cog and the Rusted Claw both prefer like vehicles. I'm not sure which one is which. But the Hive Boys, they prefer different stuff. So essentially, these specialists are going to be preferable based on what cult or subcult you're doing. And then finally, the named folks. In general, we have the named lictors, so Red Death, Red Terror, the Terror of X Planet. But the ultimate goal of the Genestealer Uprising is to give the world over to the Tyranids and be reabsorbed. This often means that lictors are deployed along with or a little bit after the Patriarch gets kind of up to speed on a planet. The lictor is not necessarily answering, direct orders from the Patriarch. He might be. But in general, lictors are capable of independent operation, and you can see here some lovely pictures of lictors. They have this kind of Cthulhu-esque mouth structure of tentacles. They have a couple of tails that allow them to hang. They've got very strong springing legs, and then 2 bladed arms and 2 grabby arms. So, I think that was quick enough. I'm sorry a lot of these memes are really blurry, and so are some of the images. I've got to remember to swap to doing pictures on different mediums rather than my phone. New vote. Lovely memes. Look them up if you like. New vote. So I have gotten enough requests to do Space Marine adversaries. Obviously, I know this was a bit of a rushed video. Sorry about that. I will definitely revisit it if I ever do a Genestealer adversaries, or even I might add it onto as an addendum of Tyranid armies. Because I know I'm not as well educated about Genestealer armies, and I know that there are people who are very, very interested in them, and you're very passionate about it, and I definitely respect that because I very much respect Xenos players. But the next thing that's coming up, the next video, no matter what, there will be a new vote, obviously. Armies won this time. This is the Army's answer to that. And then I will do Space Marine adversaries because a ton of people voted for that, and a ton of people have been asking for a very long time. The next one after that, I'm going to leave up to you guys, but it seems like the universal agreement is that you guys want to see something with the Adeptus Mechanicus, whether it's Titans or whether it is an adversaries or an armies video. Or, regular Mechanicus, we will see. I will leave that up to the vote, and I'd like people to comment on those. But the guaranteed next one, as long as there's no severe recriminations and nobody hates the idea, is going to be a Space Marine Adversaries where we talk about Loyalist Space Marines. I'm going to keep Chaos for a separate video. Matter of fact, I'm going to keep Chaos Armies as well on an Adversaries video. Probably 4 videos for Chaos Adversaries, maybe 2 or 3. But still, Space Marine Adversaries is probably coming next unless there's massive backlash against it and you guys don't want it. But it seems like enough people asked for it. So, without further ado, and with all that covered up, I will wish you all a lovely good night.